"Look at this one," the famous man said, stopping a foot from Edrin Vale's face. "Lights on, nobody home. There's nothing behind that stare at all, an empty head perfectly polished." The cameras turned with him because everything turned with him that night, and 400 guests in the State Gallery laughed on cue. I was standing the matching post 6 feet to Edrin's left, close enough to see that he did not blink. I had served beside the man for 3 years, and I can tell you the one thing none of those laughing people knew. The head that famous man called empty was the fullest in the room. My name is Wystan Locke. I was a sergeant of the household guard then, and the night I am going to tell you about began as the softest duty we drew all year. A gallery gala, polished floors, warm light, a guest list of donors and dignitaries who had paid handsomely to stand beneath the old portraits and feel important. No marching, no weather, just 2 of us flanking the dais where the evening's prize would be unveiled, ornamental as the candlesticks, expected to be exactly that. I remember thinking, as the doors opened and the perfume rolled in ahead of the crowd, that nothing would happen here worth remembering. I have rarely been so wrong. The famous man's name was Cyrus Vane, and if you owned a television in those years, you knew his face better than your neighbors. He was a memory champion, the one the programs built whole evenings around. He could be handed a shuffled deck and hand it back in order. He could meet 100 strangers and name everyone on his way out the door. He had a tower of his own design that he called the Mind Palace, and he walked audiences through it on stage with a showman's grin, depositing facts in its imaginary rooms and retrieving them to gasps. He had written books. He had a catchphrase. He had, that evening, been invited as the headline guest, the man who would dazzle the donors between the speeches and lend the charity his shine. And he had, almost the moment he arrived, decided that the 2 motionless guardsmen at the dais were the perfect props for his act. He had started gently, a wave of his hand in front of Edrin's eyes, a little routine for the nearest cluster of guests. "Watch this," he'd said. "I'll wager he doesn't so much as twitch. They train it out of them, you know, the thinking. You can't have a thinking statue." Polite laughter. He moved on, then circled back, the way a man circles a thing he has decided is his. By the second pass he had an audience, and a man like Cyrus Vane did not waste an audience. "It's almost sad," he announced, loud enough now for the cameras. "All that splendid uniform and nothing inside it, a trained blank. I store the works of a library up here." He tapped his temple, and he couldn't tell you what he had for breakfast. "Could you, soldier? No, nothing in, nothing out. The handsomest empty room in the palace." I felt my own jaw tighten and made it stop. That is the discipline they do not show on the programs, not the standing still, which any tired man can learn, but the standing still while something small and hot climbs up the back of your throat and tells you to answer. Edrin's face had not changed by the width of a hair, but I knew him, and I knew that behind the eyes that famous man had just called empty, something was already at work that none of us could see. Here is what Cyrus Vane did not know about the guardsman he had chosen for his sport. Edrin Vale did not have a good memory. He had a trained one, which is a different animal entirely, the way a working dog is a different animal from the one asleep by your fire. Before the household, before the bearskin and the gallery floors, Edrin had spent 6 years as an observer with a reconnaissance unit, the men who go out ahead and bring the picture back. They are not allowed cameras where they go, and they are not always allowed to write. So they are taught to carry it home in their heads, the count of the windows, the make of the vehicles, the faces, the small wrongnesses, the whole still photograph of a place held perfect for the debrief hours later. Edrin had been the best his unit ever produced. His instructors had a phrase for what they were building in men like him. They called it the empty room, a mind swept clean of clutter so that whatever you put in it stayed exactly where you set it, untouched, retrievable for as long as you needed it. The empty room, the very thing Cyrus Vane thought he was mocking, was the name of the gift. I only knew this because of a night 2 years before, a long cold post when men talk, and Edrin had told me how it worked, not boasting. He never boasted, but explaining it the way another man might explain how he tied a particular knot. He did not memorize lists, he said. Lists were what Cyrus Vane sold to audiences, parlor tricks, decks of cards. What Edrin did was simpler and stranger. He looked at a thing once fully, the way most people never look at anything, and then it was simply there. He could stand his post for 2 hours without moving his head and afterward tell you the order in which the first 40 guests had arrived, what each had worn, which had come in together, which had come in pretending not to have come in together. He did not try to. He could not help it. It's not a talent, he'd told me that cold night. It's a habit I can't put down. Some men can't stop counting stairs. I can't stop seeing the room. So when Cyrus Vane stood in front of him and called his head empty, Edrin was, in fact, seeing the room. All of it. Every guest who had crossed the threshold of that gallery in the 90 minutes since the doors opened. And one of those guests, Edrin would tell me later, it had snagged in him like a thorn the moment the man came through the door. One of those guests was wrong. But I am ahead of myself. Let me bring you back to the floor, to the heat of the lights and the famous man enjoying himself. Cyrus Vane had decided the act needed a finish. He produced, from the inner pocket of his dinner jacket, a single playing card. He was never without a deck. It was part of the legend, and held it up before Edrin's face like a man teasing a horse with an apple. "Last try," he said to the crowd. "I'll show him a card. One card. A child could hold one card in his mind, and in 10 minutes I'll ask him what it was, and he'll have no more idea than that wall behind him, because there is nobody. In there." He flicked the card so Edrin could see its face, the 4 of diamonds. I saw it too, and then tucked it away with a flourish. 10 minutes, he promised the donors. We'll come back to him, the forgetting machine. The crowd loved it. A woman near me actually applauded. And Edrin, who had taken in the 4 of diamonds without the smallest flicker, was at that exact moment not thinking about the card at all. He was thinking about a man in a steward's waistcoat near the east door, a man carrying a tray of glasses he never offered to anyone, a man whose shoes were wrong. I want to be fair to Cyrus Vane, because the easy thing is to make him a cartoon, and he was not. He was, by every account, genuinely gifted. The memory was real. He had drilled it for 20 years, and it had made him rich and adored. And somewhere along the way the adoration had done to him what it does to a certain kind of clever man. It had convinced him that his gift was the only kind there was, that a mind that could not perform on a stage was not a mind at all. He looked at a silent guardsman, and could not imagine that the silence held anything, because his own gift had always come with applause attached. He had forgotten, or had never known, that the deepest version of the thing he sold for entertainment was done by men who would never be allowed to mention it, in rooms with no audience, for stakes that had nothing to do with a shuffled deck. That was the gap between them. Cyrus Vane remembered to be seen remembering. Edrin remembered because forgetting, in the work that had made him, could get men killed. The speeches began. The lights dimmed over the crowd and lifted on the dais behind us, where the charity's chairman, a round, beaming man named Lord Anseth, of the fictional house whose gallery this was, stepped up to a covered easel and began to talk about the evening's purpose. The prize, he said, the thing they had all come to see unveiled, was a small painting. A miniature no larger than a man's hand, but old beyond price and lost for a century. A portrait of the house's founding queen, painted from life, vanished in a long-ago fire and rediscovered, the story went, in the false bottom of a traveling case at an estate sale. Tonight it would be revealed for the first time, photographed for the world, and then sealed into the gallery's permanent collection. The room made the sound a room makes when it has been given something to want. I was watching the crowd, because that is the job, you watch the people, not the prize, and so I saw what Edrin had already seen and filed away. The steward with the wrong shoes had drifted closer to the dais. He had set down his unwanted tray, and as Lord Anseth reached for the cloth over the easel, The steward's hand moved to the inside of his own jacket in the precise, unhurried way of a man who has rehearsed a thing until it looks like nothing at all. Then the cloth came off, the room gasped, the cameras flared white, and the steward's hand came back out empty, and he stepped back, and the moment passed. Whatever it had been, it had not happened. I let my breath out slow. I told myself I had imagined it. The painting sat on its easel under the lights, a small dark jewel of a thing, the founding queen looking out across 500 years with a face the size of a coin, and the whole gallery leaned toward it. I did not yet know that Edrin had not let his breath out at all. He had seen the same hand I had, and he had seen something else with it, and unlike me, he could not tell himself he had imagined it because Edrin did not imagine. He filed. Lord Anseth talked for a while about the painting. Then, because the evening was built around its famous guest as much as its prize, he turned the floor over to Cyrus Vane to give us a taste of the impossible. And the lights came back up, and the great man took the center with the painting glowing behind him on its easel, and the donors arranged themselves to be amazed. He was good. I will not pretend otherwise. He had a dozen guests call out birthdays, and he stacked them into his mind palace and gave them back in reverse. He took a long string of numbers from a card someone held and recited it forward, backward, and from the middle out. The applause was real, and so was the skill, and I watched Edrin out of the side of my eye and saw nothing in his face but the post, and knew, because I knew him, that none of it was reaching him. He was somewhere else entirely. He was walking a room of his own. Then Cyrus Vane remembered his prop. "Now," he said, turning, the grin widening, the cameras swinging back toward us at the dais. "I promised you a comparison. I've shown you what a trained mind can do. Let me show you the other thing, the uniform with the empty room behind the eyes." He crossed to Edrin and stood close, savoring it, a performer who has saved his best bit for the end. "Soldier, 10 minutes ago I showed you a single card. One card. You watched me do it. Now for our friends here and the cameras, tell us. What was the card?" He did not wait for an answer. He had no intention of getting one. The whole joke was the silence, the handsome blank, the proof of his point standing there in red wool, unable to produce a 4 of diamonds. He half turned back to the crowd to deliver the punchline. And Edrin spoke. His voice was not loud. Guardsmen do not raise their voices. The discipline runs too deep. But the gallery had gone quiet to hear the silence, so the quiet voice carried to every corner of it. "The 4 of diamonds," Edrin said. For one full second, nothing. Cyrus Vane's grin stayed exactly where it was, frozen like a clock that has stopped. Then a single startled laugh broke from somewhere in the crowd, and another, and the great man recovered with the speed of a true professional and threw up his hands. "He speaks. The statue speaks." "Well, a lucky guess, 4 of diamonds, 1 chance in 52. "You showed me the 4 of diamonds," Edrin said, in the same level tone, eyes forward, not looking at the man at all. "Before that, you stood with a party of 6 by the North Pillar for 4 minutes and 30 seconds and named their birthdays. The lady in greens first, then the man with the silver cane, then the 3 you took together, then last the young man who gave the wrong year and corrected it. Before that you took a number from a blue card held by the gentleman in the burgundy waistcoat, 14 digits, beginning 491. You came into this gallery at 26 minutes past 8, behind a couple in matching gray, ahead of a woman carrying a folded yellow program she has not once opened. You are the 41st guest to cross that threshold tonight. I have stood in some quiet rooms. I have never heard one go as quiet as that gallery went." Cyrus Vane's hands came down slowly. The grin had not so much fallen as drained, the way color drains from a face. He was a man who had built a kingdom on being the most remembering person in any room, and he had just been handed calmly, by a prop, a more complete account of the last hour than he himself could have given. And he understood it instantly. That was the cruelty of it for him, that his own gift made him the one person present who could fully grasp what he was hearing. The donors heard a clever trick. Cyrus Vane heard a master. "That's," he started and stopped. He tried again. Anyone could. No, Edrin said, not unkindly. They couldn't. You couldn't have told them which order the party of 6 gave their birthdays in. You weren't watching them. You were watching yourself be watched. He let that sit a moment, then added, quieter still, the only thing in it that might have been mercy. It isn't a competition. We were taught for different reasons. And there it might have ended, a famous man neatly, publicly outdone at his own table, a story the donors would dine out on for a year, the kind of small clean justice this niche knows well. The crowd was already turning Cyrus Vane's silence into delighted murmur. He stood there absorbing it, and to his credit, something moved behind his eyes that was not only humiliation. It was the dawning, appalled curiosity of a craftsman who has just met a better one and cannot pretend he hasn't. But Edrin was not finished, and what he said next had nothing to do with the contest at all. "Sergeant Locke," he said to me low, and now his head did turn a fraction, the first time he had moved in an hour. "The man who took off the steward's waistcoat." I felt the floor tilt. "Say that again." "There is a man in this room," Edrin said, "who came in at 9:04 wearing a black steward's waistcoat and carrying a tray, and who is now standing 12 feet from the painting in shirt sleeves with a folded jacket over his arm, and he is not the same man who serves the upper gallery, whom I have seen at 4 of these events. The shoes are wrong for a steward. And when Lord Anseth lifted the cloth, that man reached inside his jacket and then chose not to. He has been waiting for the cameras to finish." Cyrus Vane, 6 feet away, heard all of it. He had been waiting for his own moment to recover, to laugh the thing off and reclaim his crowd, and instead he found himself standing inside a sentence that had stopped being about him entirely. I watched him try to fit it into the trick he thought he was watching. He could not. There was nothing performed in Edrin's voice now. The man had simply turned a key and a different door had opened. I did not move my head. 3 years on the post teaches you to look at a room without appearing to. The cameras were powering down. The press photographers who had their unveiling shot were lowering their equipment and turning to the bar. The light, which had been pinned on the painting and on Cyrus Vane, was loosening, scattering back into ordinary party light. And in that loosening, exactly as Edrin had said, a man in shirt sleeves with a jacket folded over one arm was drifting, not toward the door, which is what a thief drifts toward, but toward the easel. "Why hasn't he gone for it yet?" I murmured. The question was the whole job, a snatch and run I could have answered in 2 strides. A man who waits is a man with a plan, and a plan is the dangerous thing. "Because he isn't going to run with it," Edrin said. "Watch his left hand." I watched his left hand. It was carrying, half hidden under the folded jacket, a flat case. The kind of slim, rigid portfolio an art handler uses, the kind 100 legitimate people had carried through that gallery all week as the exhibition was hung. And all at once I understood, and the understanding was colder than any shove or shout I had ever taken on a gate. He was not going to steal the painting in front of 400 people. He was going to swap it. "There's a second easel," Edrin said, reading my face. "Behind the curtain to the dais's right where the spare display stands are. I logged it when we came on at 7. It was empty then. It is not empty now. Someone set a covered frame on it during the unveiling while every eye in the room, including mine for a moment, was on the cloth coming off the real one." His jaw moved just slightly. For Edrin it was the equivalent of another man swearing. That is the part I nearly missed. The hand reaching into the jacket was the misdirection. The frame going onto the spare easel was the act. He showed us the card so we wouldn't watch the deck. A magician's principle, out of the mouth of a guardsman, about a crime being committed under the nose of the most famous magician of the age. I almost laughed, and did not, because the man in shirt sleeves had reached the easel. Here is the trouble with what we knew. We knew it the way you know a thing in your bones before you can prove it to anyone with the power to act. I could not march across a charity gala and seize a man in front of the cameras on the strength of his shoes. If I was wrong, if he was a tired art handler retrieving a stand, I would be the guardsman who tackled a steward at a children's hospital benefit, and the only clip the world would keep from that night would be mine. The protocol was clear, and it was a wall. A guardsman does not leave his post or lay hands on a guest without cause an officer can stand behind. I needed the duty officer, Captain Ress, who was somewhere near the service corridor. And I needed the thing Edrin had, that no protocol covered proof, held in a head, of exactly what had changed in that room and when. "Talk me to Ress," I said. "I'll go, you hold the dais, don't lose the painting." "I won't lose anything," Edrin said, and I believed him because it was the truest thing about him. I stepped off the post, a small scandal in itself, a guardsman moving at a gala, and crossed the back of the room at the unhurried pace that does not draw eyes. Behind me I heard Cyrus Vane's voice start up again, too bright, trying to gather the crowd back to himself, and I thought, "Good, keep them looking at you, you've finally found a use." I found Captain Ress at the mouth of the service corridor, and in 6 low sentences I gave him a thing that sounded, I knew, exactly like the fevered theory of a man who'd had a long shift. A swap, a second easel, a steward with wrong shoes. The captain's face did the thing a good officer's face does, which is to weigh the source before the story. "Vale saw it," I said. That was all I said, and the captain's weighing stopped. "I have not told you yet about the other night, the reason Captain Ress's face changed when I said the name. 8 months before, a credential had come through the palace accreditation office, a press pass for a man on a visiting delegation, and it had been good. Stamped, sealed, checked against the list, waved through by everyone whose job was to wave it through. Edrin had been on the inner post that day and had watched the man walk past, and an hour later he had quietly told his sergeant that the photograph on the pass, and the man wearing it had the same face but not the same ears, that ears do not change and these had, and that the man's wristwatch was on the wrong arm for the hand he wrote with on the entry log, which meant he was favoring the other hand, which meant he had practiced being someone whose habits he did not own. It had sounded like madness. They had checked anyway, because by then the men who ran the post had learned not to bet against Edrin Vale's eyes. The pass was a forgery laid over a real, stolen identity. The man was turned around at the inner door without a single raised voice, and the palace never published a word of it, and Edrin went back to his post and said nothing, because the work that had made him was work you do not mention. That was the kind of head Cyrus Vane had stood in front of all night and called empty. So when I told Captain Ress that Vale had seen it, the captain did not argue. He keyed his radio, quiet and fast, and the slow machinery that I have watched answer for this institution before began, this time to wake. But machinery is slow, and the man in shirt sleeves was at the easel now, and there was a covered frame on a spare stand behind a curtain 20 feet away, and 400 people and a wall of cameras stood between any of us and a clean, quiet stop. If we moved too soon and too loud, the man would simply set down his case, lift his hands, and become an art handler again, and the painting, if the swap had already happened or happened in the next 30 seconds, would walk out of the building inside a portfolio while we apologized to a charity. We needed to know which frame on which easel held the founding queen. We needed it now. And there was exactly one person in that gallery who could tell us, to a certainty, what the real painting looked like down to the brushstroke, because he had stood 8 feet from it under full light and looked at it once fully, the way most people never look at anything. I came back to the dais the long way, drifting, and reached Edrin's shoulder. "Ress is moving men to the doors," I breathed. "Soft. No charge yet. But we have a problem. If that's a swap and he's quick, the real one's already in his case and the fake's on the easel, and we can't grab a man for putting a painting where a painting belongs. We need to know which is which before he reaches a door, and we can't get a curator close enough to compare without spooking him." "Then don't get a curator," Edrin said. His eyes had not left the room. "Get me 30 seconds with both frames in my sightline." That was the moment Cyrus Vane stepped back into the story, and chose, I have always believed, the better of the two men he could have been. He had been hovering at the edge of the dais since his humbling, that appalled craftsman's curiosity still working in him, close enough to have heard every word Edrin and I had traded. He could have walked away. A lesser version of the man would have gone to the bar, salvaged his evening, told the room a funny story about the talking statue, and let the guardsmen sort out whatever they were whispering about. Instead, he came to Edrin's other shoulder, and when he spoke, the showman was gone out of his voice entirely. What was left was quiet and direct, and for the first time all night humble. "You looked at the painting once," Cyrus Vane said. "When the cloth came off, one look." "Yes," Edrin said. "Tell me what you have." It was not a challenge, it was a colleague offering his hands. And Edrin, eyes forward, told him. The crack in the varnish at the lower left, shaped like a wishbone. The founding queen's left eye set a fraction higher than her right, a flaw in the original. The curator had mentioned it in his remarks. The kind of thing a forger working from a photograph would correct without thinking because it looks like a mistake. The single bright point of paint at the corner of her collar, where the light had caught it, no larger than a grain of salt. The way the gold of the frame was worn smooth on the lower rail where 500 years of hands had lifted it, and rough on the upper. "The frame on the spare easel," Edrin said, "is the same model, same gilt, same dimensions. He had it made to match, but he had it made to match a photograph. He could not photograph the wear, and he could not photograph the crack, because the crack does not show in any published image. I checked the exhibition catalog at the start of the week, and it is retouched out. The forger does not know the crack exists." I watched the thing land on Cyrus Vane, and I watched it do something to him I would not have predicted. He had spent 20 years building a palace in his mind to hold dead facts for applause. And here was a man using the same kind of mind to hold a living thing that mattered, with no applause anywhere in it. And the great memory champion looked at the guardsman the way an apprentice looks at a master he did not know existed. "What do you need me to do?" Cyrus Vane said. "I can't leave the dais," Edrin said. "If I move, he moves. He's watching us the way I'm watching him." He clocked the sergeant crossing the room. "But you," and here I swear the smallest dry thing came into Edrin's voice, the closest he came all night to a smile, "you are the most watchable man in this building. Walk to the spare easel. Make it a performance. Gather a crowd to it, tell them you've a final trick, anything, you're good at this. Get 15 people and their phones around that frame and lift the cloth to show them. He cannot move a frame that 20 witnesses are filming, and while it's uncovered I'll see it. From here, I only need to see it." It was, I realized, exactly the inversion of the cruelty Cyrus Vane had tried to work all evening. He had used his fame to make a quiet man a spectacle. Now he was being asked to make himself the spectacle so the quiet man could do his real work in the cover of it. Misdirection turned honest. Cyrus Vane straightened his jacket and the grin came back, but it was a working grin now, a tool, not a vanity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, his voice filling the gallery the way it was built to, every head turning to him as if pulled on strings. "You've been very patient with an old show-off. One last impossibility before the night is done, and this one needs all of you, right here, phones out, because no one will believe you tomorrow." He was already walking, drawing the room behind him like a tide, straight toward the curtain at the dais's right and the spare easel behind it. "I'm going to need a frame I haven't touched, a room full of witnesses, and absolutely no help from our friend the forgetting machine." The man in shirt sleeves froze. I saw it because I was watching for it, and Edrin saw it because Edrin saw everything. The half-second when the false steward understood that the crowd was flowing toward the very stand where he had hidden his switched frame, that a wall of cameras was about to surround the one object he most needed unseen. His weight shifted. His hand tightened on the portfolio case. For the length of a breath he was a man deciding whether to bolt, and a bolting man at a gala, with the doors already quietly held, was a man we could take. He did not bolt. He was too good for that, too rehearsed. He smoothed his face and stepped smoothly to intercept Cyrus Vane with the patient smile of a staffer heading off a tipsy guest. "Sir, I'm sorry, that stand isn't part of the display if you'll just—" And Cyrus Vane, who had spent his life learning exactly how to hold a room's attention and not let it go, did not let it go. "Nonsense, you're perfect, come into the shot," he boomed, throwing an arm wide and sweeping 15 delighted donors and their raised phones into a half-circle around the spare easel before the man could plant himself in front of it. "Now, the cloth." And with a flourish that had sold out theaters, he whipped the cover off the frame on the spare stand. There she was. The founding queen, the size of a man's hand, looking out across 500 years to 15 pairs of eyes, identical to the painting on the dais behind us. The donors made the pleased, baffled sound of people who do not understand the trick but are glad to be inside it. 2 paintings. The same painting twice. A delicious impossibility, exactly the kind of thing the famous man was famous for. And across the room, on the dais, unmoving, Edrin Vale looked at the second frame for the first time. One look. The way most people never look at anything. He found me with his eyes without turning his head. "That one's the forgery," he said, so quietly it was barely breath. "Left eye corrected, no crack at the lower left. The collar light is painted in the wrong corner. They put it where it shows in the catalog photo, not where it is on the panel. It's beautiful work. It's wrong in 4 places. The painting on the dais behind us is the real one. He hasn't swapped them yet, he was about to. The case under his jacket is empty. He came to take the real one out and leave that in its place when the room thinned, and we walked the room to him before he could." I keyed my own radio twice. The signal Captain Ress and I had set. Take him soft. We had what we needed. Not a guess. Not a hunch about shoes. A complete, specific, defensible account of a crime caught one motion before it happened, held whole in the head of the man the Evening Star had spent an hour calling empty. What followed was the quietest arrest I ever stood near, and the proudest. No shout, no scuffle, no clip for anyone's phone. 2 of Ress's men in plain dinner jackets simply closed in on either side of the man in shirt sleeves, while the crowd was still cooing over Cyrus Vane's twin paintings. And a third lifted the empty art handler's case from under his folded jacket as gently as taking a coat at a door. The false steward looked for one instant at the dais, at the still guardsman in red who had not moved from his post the entire night and had beaten him anyway, and something in his face came apart. He had planned for cameras. He had planned for curators. He had planned for every watcher in that gallery, except the one who was paid to do nothing but watch, and had turned out to be the most dangerous man in the room. They walked him out through the service corridor without breaking the rhythm of the party. Most of the 400 never knew anything had happened at all. That is how this institution prefers it. The work that protects a thing is rarely the work that gets seen, and the men who are best at it have made their peace with the dark. It came apart for him quickly after that, the way these things do once the first thread is pulled. The frame on the spare easel was confirmed within the hour by the curator as a forgery so fine it would have hung undetected in the permanent collection for a generation, which had been the whole point. The real painting was photographed, sealed, and carried to the vault that night with 2 guardsmen walking it the whole way. The man in shirt sleeves was not a steward, and had never served the upper gallery. The accreditation that had let him in was a near-perfect copy laid over the record of a real contractor, the same patient method as the forged press pass 8 months before, and when the palace traced it back, it opened onto a small, careful ring that had done this twice already, to 2 other houses, and gotten clean away both times with a treasure swapped for a flawless fake that no one thought to question for years. 2 houses had been robbed and did not know it. This was where it stopped. It stopped at a crack in the varnish shaped like a wishbone, retouched out of every photograph in the world, that exactly one man had seen. I went looking for Edrin near the end of the night, after the donors had gone home full of a story about a memory champion and his vanishing twin painting. Never the true story, only the cover one which suited everyone. I found him back on his post at the dais, in front of the real founding queen, exactly as still as he had been at 7 o'clock, as if none of it had happened. And standing in front of him, alone now, with no crowd and no cameras and nothing left to perform, was Cyrus Vane. The great man was not grinning. He was looking at Edrin the way you look at a thing you misjudged so completely that the misjudgment has taught you something about yourself. "I called you empty," Cyrus Vane said, "in front of 400 people, on camera." "You did," Edrin said, eyes forward, no heat in it, a fact filed. "I've spent my whole life," the famous man said slowly, "being the person in the room who remembers. I built a palace in my head to do it, and I never once used it for anything that mattered more than applause." He looked back at the painting, at the queen the size of a coin who would have walked out of the building in a stranger's case tonight if not for the man he had mocked. "You have the same gift I have. Better. And you stand here all day where no one can see it, and you let a fool like me make a joke of you, and you'd have let me keep making it. You only spoke because there was a reason to." He shook his head. "What is that? What do you call that?" For a long moment I thought Edrin would not answer at all. Then he said the thing I have carried with me ever since, the thing that told me, more than any drill or medal, what kind of man I had been standing beside for 3 years. "You remember so they'll clap," Edrin said. "I remember so I don't have to be thanked. The gift is the same. We were just taught it by different teachers." He let a beat pass. "Yours wanted you seen. Mine wanted everyone in the room to get home safe and never know why." Cyrus Vane was quiet a long time. Then he did a thing I have never seen any guest do before or since, and it was worth more than the apology he never quite managed to say out loud. He straightened, and he stood at attention, clumsy, untrained, a civilian's best honest attempt at it, and he held it in front of the guardsman for a count of 5. Then he turned and walked out into the night a quieter man than the one who had walked in. I asked Edrin about it later, on a cold post months on, when men talk. I asked him whether it had stung being called empty, in front of the cameras, by a man who turned out to need him. He thought about it the way he thought about everything fully once. "No," he said, "he had it exactly backward, that's all. He thought the stillness meant there was nothing in here." He tapped his own temple once, the only echo of the famous man's gesture I ever saw him make, and there was something almost gentle in it. "It's the opposite. You go that still because there's everything in here, and you've learned to hold all of it without letting any of it show. The empty room isn't empty, Whiston. It's just swept clean enough to keep what matters." I have stood a great many posts since that night, and watched a great many people walk past men in red and assume the silence was the absence of a person. It is the easiest mistake in the world to make, and the famous learn to make it faster than anyone, because applause teaches you that a mind you can't see perform isn't there. But I think of the founding queen, sealed safe in her vault, looking out across 500 years from a panel with a wishbone crack that one man saw once and never let go. And I think of the head, a celebrated genius called empty on national television, the fullest, quietest room in the palace, holding everything, asking for nothing, remembering so the rest of us would never have to know how close we came. That is the discipline they do not put on the programs, not the standing still. The standing still while you carry the whole room home in your head and let the world believe there is nothing behind your eyes until the night it turns out there is everything, and it is exactly enough.